So just what is growing in the UK economy? In the previous episode, we showed that real wages in the UK have actually been falling for 6 years in a row. This led us to ask the question, how can the UK economy be growing when real wages are falling every year? Well, there is one thing in the UK that has grown. Debt. In the spring of 2010, the date of the last election, the debt of the UK stood at around 770 billion. So what is it today? It's north of 1,250 billion, which is a rise of 60% and nearly 500 billion added to the national debt in just 4 years. So what's the national debt projected to be at the time of the next election a year from now? Nearly 1,400 billion! That's an increase to the national debt of around 80% in just 5 years. And in a wibbly-wobbly world of modern finance, where debt is money, when a government borrows money and spends it into the economy, it boosts the GDP of the country, which gives the appearance that the economy is growing. But remember, all this GDP growth is simply the country borrowing growth from the future to enjoy today. After all that debt has to be repaid back at some point, and when it does, it'll negatively impact the GDP figures for the UK. No wonder the Bank of England head said, quote, "The UK recovery is neither balanced nor sustainable." So what does all that look like? At the time of the first general election in the UK in 1708, the national debt stood at just 200 million. By the time Robert Peel's government was in office in 1841, the national debt had ballooned to nearly 800 million. By the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, under Chamberlain, the national debt of the UK had reached 8 billion. And by the time the end of Thatcher's government in 1990, the national debt stood at nearly 150 billion. And by the time Labour had been in power, at the spring of 2010, the national debt of the UK stood at 770 billion. And should the Tories win the next general election, it means that sometime in 2016, the national debt of the UK will stand at a whopping 1,500 billion, which means Osborne will have added more to the national debt than every other government in the history of the UK.